In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains how we feel when we are inside and outside of our territory.
What seems to me to have happened, because you might think, well, how did people come to conceptualize such a thing? Because I would think of all the things that are difficult to conceptualize, the category of all things that you have not yet encountered is the most difficult thing to discover, right? It's kind of like zero. It took people a long time to figure out zero, and no wonder. We need a symbol for nothing. Well, this is even worse. We need a representation for potential. Well, you think, well, why? Well, because it's actually potential that you're interacting with all the time. Now, what seems to me to have happened was that, this is an evolutionary just so story, so I'm not assuming that it actually worked precisely this way, but it doesn't matter, because I'm going to touch on the appropriate, the appropriate features. Well, one of the things we know about social animals, generally speaking, and animals in general, is that they have a territory, right? And so you think, well, what is their territory exactly? And you might say, well, you can mark it out. Here's a, what do we think about? What would have a territory? We might as well make it like a tiger. They're pretty solitary, so it'll be simple. They have a big territory, right? It spans hundreds of square miles. And the reason for that is, well, they're tigers. You can't have like 50 of them because they'll just eat everything that's there. You have to have a big territory to support one apex predator. So then you might say, well, what exactly is the territory of the tiger? And you'd say, well, here's its boundaries. This is where it roams. But that's not the right way of thinking about the territory of the tiger, because the territory of the tiger is actually all the places where, when the tiger does its thing, the things that the tiger wants to or expects happens. That's the tiger's territory. It's the same with you. You're at home wherever you know what to do. And what you're doing when you know what to do is you know how to match this hierarchy, which is partly action-oriented. You know how to match the hierarchy with the situation so that when you put it into practice, the potential that's there transforms itself into what you're aiming at. And that's your territory. And you need to think about it that way, because your territory can shift very rapidly on you. And if you think about it geographically, it's kind of confusing. So let's say you're on the subway that you always take. And then someone sits down beside you and they're muttering away madly and have a pretty malevolent look on their face, and you get a glimpse inside their coat and it's like there's a knife. It's like you're not in your territory anymore. And the fact that all of the objective entities are still there arrayed around you it's nothing more than what would you call it? It's a delusion at that point to think that those things characterize where you are. Okay, so if you're willing to consider territory as that, it's a space-time continuum, okay? And the reason I'm stressing that, first of all, whatever reality is a space-time continuum, right? It's got 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time, and everyone knows that. As we sit here, more or less stable in 3 dimensions, time flows past us in some sense, and so the 3-dimensional reality is transforming all by itself just because of time. Okay, and so when we're mapping out our territories, we map out space-time territories. And so that means that not only do you know where you are, you know when you are. And if you're in your territory, you know how to act for that place and that time so that you transform the potential that's there into whatever it is that you're aiming at. Okay, so that's your territory. Now, that territory is isomorphic evolutionarily with lots of things, which you could also confuse geographically. So, you might think of a human territory as something like, it's probably, the fundamental human territory is probably a fire, right? And so the fire is a place of light in the darkness, and then you could think of rings, concentric rings of relative safety surrounding the fire. So right beside the fire where it's warm and light and there's lots of other people, man, that's explored territory, But then if you start wandering away from the fire into the bush, especially if you're in a very biologically active area, then the farther away you get from the fire, the more you're going outside of your territory. And you can tell that's happening because your whole nervous system starts to function differently. What happens is that the nervous system parts that you were using while you were known territory, they just shut down, and the other nervous system elements that you use in unknown territory start to turn on. And generally, you're not very happy about that, because when you're where you've mastered the territory, you can presume that neutral or moderately good things are going to happen, with the possibility of something great now and then. But as you move away from that, it flips in some sense to, I don't know what's going on here, and I might fall, to something's going to bite me, to I'm going to die a painful death, and you don't use the same circuits to process the first situation as you do to process the second. You don't even like having the second one on, so you know what it's like. Maybe you've been feeling a bit down, because that always helps. And then you wake up at 3 in the morning and you're worrying about 6 things, and you hear some random noise somewhere there shouldn't be a random noise. Well, how you feel right then, that's what it is like to have the system that deals with the unexpected on. You're like a prey animal. Really, really, exactly like one, because that's actually what you are in many ways. And so, your whole biology transforms so that you're prepared for God only knows what. Well, what seemed to have happened in the course of evolution was that when we were smaller creatures, and far after that, before, let's say, we figured out how to use throwing sticks and slings, and then later maybe bows and arrows, or maybe even sticks, like, we were getting eaten a lot. I think I told you guys last week that they just discovered this damn cat in Africa that looks like it preyed on our forebearers, and we have pretty hard skulls, so the normal cat can't really gnaw through them, but this cat had a special set of teeth, and if it grabbed the front of your head, it would drive one of its teeth right through the back of your skull. So, the hominids were preyed on enough so that they had their own predators. Well, so, that's just not very pleasant. And then that's by the time we were hominids. You can go back farther than that to when we were little tree rats, roughly speaking, and then all sorts of things were eating us. There were a lot of reptiles around back then, and 60 million years ago, and they weren't pleasant. There were still dinosaurs around 60 million years ago. And so, that's a lot of evolutionary time for us to have developed biological systems that distinguish between places we're safe and places we're not safe. Well, you roughly have one set of neuropsychophysiological functions for familiar territory and another set for unfamiliar territory. Now, what I would say, this is where this becomes, I think, radically different than terror management theory. What this hierarchy is doing when it's functioning is shutting off, it's keeping the system that operates in unexplored territory shut off. And you like that. And that's when you're calm. And like you are in here, you're relatively at home here, because you assume that you know how to act here. As long as you sit and you ask questions more or less appropriately, and you don't bother people, and you don't talk on your phone and various other things, the probability that you're going to be confronted by an angry primate or some other predator is very, very low. And so you'd say, well, you're normal. You feel like you do normally here. But I would say the only reason you feel that way normally to begin with is because you don't go places where you feel not normal. You stay away from them. And everyone knows what those places are like.